It's the August 28th edition of the MMA Junkie Twitter Mailbag. I am Mike Bohn, senior reporter, filling in for my man Nolan King this week, who will be back with you guys next Friday. Let's jump right into it. Question 1 comes from @ScrubEdub. Daniel Cormier is 1-3 with one no contest against his greatest rivals. Where does he really rank among the greats in MMA history? Look, we know Daniel Cormier lost to Jon Jones twice. He lost to Stipe Miocic twice, but he also beat Stipe Miocic once. I think Daniel Cormier's legacy isn't too hurt by the fact he didn't get this fairy tale ending to his career. He is still one of the greatest of all time, in my opinion. A top 10, top 15 fighter in the history of our sport. That is high praise when you think about how many all-time great athletes we have had here. But just look at the resume. Look at the names he has beat. A championship holder in 2 different organizations, if you include the Strikeforce Heavyweight Grand Prix. He won the heavyweight title, won the light heavyweight title in the UFC, defended them both, was the first to do that. So really remarkable career for Daniel Cormier. Some of the biggest fights we've ever seen in UFC history have included Daniel Cormier. And yes, he didn't win them all, but I think it very much shows how good and how interested people were in his skill set and just his abilities and how high of a level they really rose. So I think Daniel Cormier, yeah, he didn't have that, walk into the sunset with the belt around his waist moment, but I don't think that takes away from what he contributed to the sport. And I think he is going to be ranked among those all-time greats for a very, very long time until, of course, better fighters in the future come on and surpass all these guys we consider the greats right now. But right now, in my opinion, Daniel Cormier has a very firm legacy in the sport. Question 2 from Andy Rue. Do you think the women's featherweight division ends with an Amanda Nunes win in her next fight? Yes, very interesting. Amanda Nunes scheduled to defend her women's featherweight title against Megan Anderson at UFC 256 on December 12th. I don't think this spells the end of the women's featherweight division because there's never really been a women's featherweight division, if we're being honest. Going back to the inaugural title fight between Germaine de Randamie and Holly Holm, with everything with Chris Cyborg, even to now, the UFC hasn't done a ton to give this weight class a lot of depth. They've signed a few fighters here and there, yes, thrown a few matchups together, but it's never assembled anything to be a real weight class, and I think that's how it's going to be until the end. I think they'll find someone here and there for Amanda Nunes to fight at that weight. She can defend the belt once every 12 to 18 months, something like that, and I think they'll just keep this double champ thing going because ultimately it's a great promotional tool for Amanda Nunes, a great way to expose her to fans and to really show that she is something special, the GOAT in our sport. So I think Amanda Nunes, even if she beats Anderson here, they'll eventually find someone for her to defend that 145 belt against in the future, and that'll just be the way it goes until Amanda Nunes probably walks away from our sport. Question 3 from Johnny G. Which UFC champion versus Bellator champion fight would be most competitive? Well, a very timely question here from Johnny G. Of course, this UFC versus Bellator talk, all the rage at the moment. I think right now it is a coin toss, in my opinion, between Kamaru Usman versus Douglas Lima at welterweight or Alexander Volkanovski versus Patricio Pitbull at featherweight. Those, in my opinion, would be the 2 most compelling matchups you could put together. Gun to my head, I think probably Volkanovski versus Pitbull would be the more competitive fight, just because there is some of those questions around Douglas Lima's wrestling, as we've seen him have some trouble there in the past, but he's really shored up the holes in his game a lot in the past few years, and maybe he could give Kamaru Usman a real run for his money. Would love to see that fight, but just considering the dominance we've seen from Usman in the UFC against higher level opponents that Lima's been fighting, I think that really would make a challenging matchup, but it would be a fun one. You turn your head to Volkanovski and Pitbull, who I think have similar physical attributes, similar fighting skills, and that would just be a really, really interesting matchup to have. I don't know if we'll ever see it, but it's fun to dream, and I'd love to see Volkanovski versus Pitbull, especially after their little banter on Twitter back and forth of late. Last but not least, we go to UFC face swap. Sticking on this UFC versus Bellator beat, which organization truly has the best light heavyweight division, and who is currently the best light heavyweight fighter in MMA with Jon Jones moving up a weight class? Well, I think it sides with the UFC on both. I think we are going to determine our number 1 light heavyweight in the world when Dominic Reyes fights Jan Blachowicz at UFC 253 on September 26th. We saw Dominic Reyes comes within an inch of beating Jon Jones. He would have that light heavyweight belt right now, and we'd all be calling him the number 1. So I think that's probably the guy that you're going to see if he emerges from that fight. Jan Blachowicz, a great case as well. Bellator, to their credit, does have some good things going showing Vadim Nevkov, the fact that he's kind of this mysterious figure. He destroyed Ryan Bader, but he hasn't tested the waters against some of these other current UFC fighters or any of these top guys in the UFC, so we don't really know how good he really is at that point. And I think if you're Bellator, you can use that to your benefit, prop him up. But I think these guys in the UFC, they're constantly fighting the very best, and I think that kind of grooms them well to be positioned as that number one guy. I think Reyes, Blachowicz, whoever comes out of that fight, going to be the number one guy. But to Bellator's credit, they have put together a nice little division over there, and the fact that we're even talking about this is a huge credit to Bellator and shows how far they've come in terms of this overall MMA discussion and the perception of fans. So good on them as well. That wraps it up for this week. I am Mike Bohn. As I said off the top, Nolan King will be back with you guys next week for another edition of the MMA Junkie Mailbag.